Okay, I'd like to open the meeting. It's 3:31. And roll call. Shepherd here.
Luna LaPierre.
Bill Irving.
Grace here. And entering.
Welcome.
Okay, next would be the minutes from November the 12th. Any comments or questions on those? You look good. Good job, Amy. Oh, I second. All in favor? Shepherd, aye. All right, next on the agenda is our distinguished fire chief.
I don't know how distinguished I am, but here I am.
There were a list of questions from, how the budget committee's been doing it this year is they've reviewed all the materials. They discuss department budgets a week in advance or a meeting in advance, and just pull out those list of questions that's important to them. I can pull them up and kind of walk through it if that's okay.
You would do that because I stupidly left them on my desk.
That's okay. So.
I have them here.
Thanks for the help. Yeah, thanks for the help.
Yeah. Good, because my screen just went black.
Too.
So.
Connor had one on his too.
I did?
Brad had one.
I reserve the right to do that.
There was a question about the revolving fund. You said they were going to ask about that.
Yep.
That's always my question.
Yeah. Always. Okay. So now my screen's not black, but yeah, so let's start at the top. The first question is?
The ambulance revenue.
Yep. Has been moved from ambulance revolving. There was a suggestion to take the increased expenses in the operating supplies to the ambulance revolving fund, either the entire budget line or just the increase. I explained to the group the value in maintaining the regular operating budget line for maintenance in the default budget, whereas if we reduce that, then we don't have a backup appropriation. But there was an increase in that budget line proposed for 2025, and so the proposal was to not increase that line, but cover the additional needed expenses out of the revolving fund.
So I think, I'm sorry, I think my argument to that is that we should be using the revolving fund for bigger ticketed items, expenses. The problem is if we take something out of, we take a line out for a few $1,000s. To me, the thing is that we're supposed to try to budget as close as we can and not have a lot of surplus left over at the end of the year. And while the town's very good with allowing us to make sure we don't go more than our bottom line spending without authorization from the select board, it's if you're taking these expenses out of the revolving fund, the problem is after a while you're spending, you don't really realize what you're spending out of a line. So to me, if you spend, I've always kind of looked at it and said, if I spent, say, $7,000 on a $5,000 budget, I'd look at why I was $2,000 over. And if I saw that as a kind of a, hey, that's a one-time expense, it's probably not going to be a problem this year, then I'm fairly comfortable to get it back down closer to that $5,000. But if I start to realize that, hey, it went up $2,000 because it was just the cost of doing business, equipment, or not equipment, but supplies are more expensive, or whatever the case is, then to me, that the emphasis is on me to raise that number and then come back to you folks and or the select board and say, well, there's an increase in this line because, and here's the reason for it. So I would defer to you, but I'm not a strong supporter of using the revolving fund as a savings account, for lack of a different way of putting it.
Yeah, so the current budget 7,000. The proposed budget for the EMS operating supplies is 9,000. So it's a $2,000 increase. Does the budget committee want to make any recommendation on that budget line?
I think you're going to see, my rationale for that $2,000 increase was just the cost of doing business. What you know, it doesn't take much. We buy a fair amount of, quite a few EMS supplies. We certainly take whatever we can get from the hospital. But like we buy the AED pads for the police and fire. So we keep them in stock. We maintain their AEDs. If they show up at a medical aid that requires the AED pads to be put on, and they got there before we do put their pads on, you can't reuse them. So even if the patient didn't necessarily need them, once they're stuck on you, they're stuck on you. And so they come back to the station, we replace those. Them pads are around $140 a set right now. And Barrington does a fair amount of, I would say we do more than our share of cardiac arrest in a year. I would say on average that we do 15 plus a year. And that's quite a bit for this size town we have.
So I'm noticing that we went over budget this year by about $1,000.
Yep.
So basically you're adding another $1,000 onto what?
I think you'll find by the time we get through the end of December and the bills kind of catch up, it'll be closer to that $9,000 that we'll spend in that line.
How about the overall budget, while we're on that subject? I know this is produced very early in the process, and originally you thought there might be about $77,000 left. What would you project now?
To be honest with you, I haven't looked at the numbers in a while. We have a verbal commitment. Connor can probably do a better job answering that question for me. We have kind of a verbal commitment to do some, we hired the new administrative assistant about a little over a month ago. She's working out great. The office she has, we want to put a window in the wall, and we want to go back to, originally when that building was built, the front main entrance served the fire and the police. You either went straight in and a little bit to the left and you had the police department. You went to the right and there was a door to get on our side. A number of years ago during renovations, that door was cut off and a closet was put there. We want to remove the closet so to allow a pass through from that area back into the fire station, and in that wall that's the lobby for the public safety building, to put a window in similar to what Tiffany has in the selectman's office. Be a piece of safety glass with a gap underneath to be able to hand paperwork through and to be able to talk through. And we won't put a fire type shade on there, but we'll put a shade so when the office is closed and the administrative assistant is not in the office, that people will have to buzz to try to get one of us in the building. That's about, I'm shooting from the hip, it was a little under $6,000 for that project. While that technically should be something that would be spent out of general government or the building maintenance side, I think we decided because this work, and Connor can correct me if I'm wrong, this work is primarily only going to benefit the fire and EMS. It's not something that's for both fire and EMS, and you got to try to figure out what percentage it belongs to who. And I think, I don't want to speak for Jim Anderson, but I think facilities budget getting near the end of the year, they're getting a little tighter on money. So I think we agreed that because I would have a little bit extra money left in my budget, that it made sense for me to incur that expense. My vehicle maintenance line is going to be considerably over budget this year. I think that's primarily for two reasons. We had to do some unanticipated work that was probably around $4,000 or $5,000, and the fact that vehicle maintenance and parts are a considerable expense. One in particular is our ambulance 2. I sent it in for an inspection sticker in September. They came back with a grocery list of things that had to be fixed before they could put a sticker on it. It was around $2,100 to $2,200. I kind of wrestled back and forth with it. Started looking at other options and, talked to the selectmen about a month ago and more or less made the decision to make the repairs on that so that we'd have it as a backup ambulance for another year. But that was an unanticipated expense. I just didn't think we were going to have to do that. And then we had the tanker had some work that was not part of warranty that needed to get done, a couple $1,000. And typical service on one of those trucks, they don't get a lot of mileage, but once a year they get oil change and greased and fluids checked and stuff like that. And right now a typical service on them trucks is about $1,000 each. So I still think the money, for the maintenance is close, but certainly in the next couple of years, we'll have to start looking at maybe increasing that line.
Yeah, and so the fire chief had originally expected that there'd be about $76,000 unspent. Most of that is from vacancies in the full-time firefighter positions. Right now we have 3 of 4 positions unfilled, and so those wages in full-time wages and the associated benefits is the largest portion of that surplus. Looking at the end of October, so 83% through the year, the department had spent 72% of its budget, and that tracks pretty closely, a little bit ahead of what the projection was. So maybe there'll be a little less than 76,000, but still the majority of that surplus is from unexpended wage and benefit appropriations. It is important to keep in mind that some of those unexpended appropriations are offset by backfilling those shifts with part-time positions and overspending those budgeted appropriations to fill the shifts that full-time employees aren't filling, and then also overtime. So the overtime line is only $15,000 in the current year budget, but there's much more overtime that we've spent this year, and most of that will probably end up coming from surplus from the budget because of the vacancies. And so, yeah, I wouldn't say it's going to be all of 76,000, but it will be close.
And if I could just kind of piggyback a little bit on that, I approached a selectman about 2 months ago with staffing issues, and I presented them with a plan that basically allowed us to put a $5 per hour bonus pay for part-time firefighter EMTs, and if it's a single cert EMT, it's $250. And my rationale behind that is I sat down with the town administrator and the office staff, and we determined that a full-time firefighter in the town costs somewhere between $52 and $57 an hour, depending on what they may be getting for an insurance package. And so if you look at our base salary of, say, around $23 an hour for a part-time or a full-time firefighter, by being able to go in and ask for this $5 an hour bonus, I was able to articulate to the select board that the town's still saving money because we're spending less than $30 an hour because we're not providing them with the benefits of retirement and health insurance and stuff like that. And they approved it. So the idea is that $5 an hour has been absorbed in the budget for this year because we only had a couple months that we were going to do this. But moving forward, the idea would be is that $5 an hour would come out of the revolving fund because I think would I come up with a number around $130,000 or something if it, or somewhere in
All
that
the
area.
shifts were filled. So that kind of folds into another question from the budget committee last meeting. This one came from Scott. The question is really about what the most effective tools for recruitment and retention are. And I think the context of that question is what do we need to be doing that we aren't in order to fill those positions? This group has talked a lot about the police department and the staffing level and the positions. The police chief presented an added position in the police department. And so that was a good narrative on what we've done kind of midstream for the part-time staff to help us backfill these shifts for the vacancies. But what tools do you have, or are the most productive ways to affect recruitment and retention, full-time firefighters?
So I think from a full-time standpoint, when you're looking at, we've been able to hire a couple of, since we instituted this bonus plan, we've been able to hire 3 Rochester firefighters to come down and work for us on their days off. And, I kind of went into this with the mindset that if you're a full-time firefighter somewhere, a firefighter EMT somewhere, and, it's, what's that old saying, the cobbler's kids are the last ones to get new shoes. If you're already doing this, if you're a full-time firefighter, and I'll use the example of the city of Rochester, city of Dover, and you're working, you're 48 plus some overtime, it's pretty hard to get enthused about let's go to Barrington or Farmington or Milton as a part-timer. So, when they sit there and go, hey, Barrington's putting almost $30 an hour on the table for us to come out and cover shifts, it's been a pretty good incentive. It encourages them to, now somebody's standing there going, geez, it's kind of hard to pass up $30 an hour. I'll give them 12 or 24 hours a week. But, I think the thing is as much as I hate to say it, because I pay taxes in this town too, but, you want to be on the cutting edge. You don't, there's things that Rochester and Dover and Portsmouth and Manchester and Nashville and the bigger departments can do that Barrington and Farmington and Milton and Stratford will never, ever be able to do. And you're not trying to keep up with Rochester in that perspective. But what you really need to do, I've lost the last 2 out of the 3 people that we lost since April, both went to bigger departments, and they both went strictly for the purpose of having the ability of a career advancement. One of them actually wants to be a paramedic, and he's gone to the city of Dover. They're gonna put him in paramedic school. And Connor and I had that conversation. It doesn't make sense for Barrington to put somebody in a paramedic program because you got to fill their shifts while they're gone. The city of Dover's got 50 people to pick from. Barrington has 4. So it's going to become very expensive for us, and we're not going to gain anything. And if you spend $25,000 or $30,000 to get them through paramedic school, once they've got their paramedic license, now the city of Dover or Concord or whoever is sitting there going, hey, come on down here to work for us for $3 or $4 or $5 an hour more than Barrington pays. It doesn't make financial sense. One of my guys, same thing in April. He wants to be a paramedic. He left in April. He's gone to a department that will put him through paramedic school. So I think from an incentive to get our people to try to recruit people is, if I'm going to compare Barrington and Milton and Farmington and Stratford. I really don't think any one of the 4 of us has a lot to offer somebody more than the other 4 can do. I think we're all pretty like departments. So I think what you got to do is you got to be that one standing there and going, hey, if Barrington's paying $20 an hour and we're paying the most out of anybody else, one of those guys should be standing up and going, hey, we'll pay 25. And so I think that's kind of where we're at right now, is that I think we have to look at paying these people more money so that, if I'm going to lose, if Barrington's going to lose a person to a bigger department, that they're going to benefit themselves and their family, and they're going to do something that Barrington can't provide. That's different than somebody coming into me and saying, hey, chief, I'm leaving and I'm going to be going to Nottingham. Nothing against Nottingham, nothing against Stratford or Northwood, but I would sit here and go, what are we doing wrong? If I'm going to lose you, you're basically going to just be going from here and moving over here. You're not moving up, you're just moving over. We should be looking at that. So, Barrington really should look at making sure, a couple of years ago, they did the wage study. The firefighters got another big pay raise out of that wage study. The firefighters have actually benefited in the last two wage studies that were done. But I'm really good friends with the Milton fire chief, and we used to be fairly close to what they paid, and now he will tell you that, they're not number one anymore. They're not the ones that, but, for this area, I do believe that we should make sure that we're putting good money up there for these people to come work for us, because if you're not putting money on the table, there's not a whole lot of incentive for them to come work here.
Any feedback from the group? It looks like Mona's got something, Peter.
Actually, Peter, go first, because
No, I'm all set.
mine's more long-term.
Fire away.
So, given what I've just heard, I'm looking overall, we've got some areas that I know recruiting is going to be hard over all forthcoming for all areas. Has there been any talk about doing a fire district, joining some of the towns together to,
It's an excellent question, and it's
you
not
know,
a
I'm
unique.
just thinking what's been done in the, actually, I was thinking, has this been done in the state? And
No.
yes, it has.
Well, in
Not
very
in
limited
fire.
capacity, right? Like Tilton Northfield's probably the closest example of a true, a formal cooperative agreement. They have their own municipal government established to support that. But all of those options are on the table for as we explore what the future fire service looks like. Unfortunately, like the chief said, the problems that we're experiencing in Barrington aren't unique to Barrington, and it's not likely that the solutions will be unique to Barrington either. And so a lot of those conversations have kind of been ongoing anyways, but we being Barrington and surrounding communities, will be forced into those conversations even more so as we experience these problems. So
This model you're talking about, regionalization, I'll say this: Rick Walker is a very firm supporter of regionalization. I'll be retired and probably dead before it happened in this area, because this is New England, and this is New England.
Oh, I know.
And
Believe me,
we do our own.
Well, I didn't even dare go there.
well, it's something like long-term.
We do our own, New England, we do our own thing. And I'll just put it in this perspective. Stratford County has 13 communities. I think Stratford County is in a unique position to regionalize. And I say this from the perspective that we have Rochester that kind of anchors the north of the county, and Dover that kind of anchors the south of the county. And if you could, in Rick Walker's little fantasy world, we would have a fire chief, and then we have district chiefs that would be responsible for a zone. And when you really stop and look at, and I'll pick on myself, the town pays Rick Walker a lot of money. It costs the town almost $175,000 a year to have me here as a fire chief. And that's with salary and benefits. And so if all 13 communities had to go and hire a full-time fire chief, it gets pretty expensive. But if you could if you could take Rick Walker's $200,000 and you divvy that out into a place that it could get put into staffing, getting people in. And, okay, so there's not a fire chief sitting in Barrington when they're, watching for a fire, but you'd have a captain assigned to the district that covers Barrington, and that you'd have a district chief that maybe comes out of Rochester to go to Barrington, or maybe it comes out of Durham, or it comes out of Dover. But 13 communities, maybe you have a district chief that's responsible for 4 communities or 5, depending on, how it's based, maybe. But you could better allocate those monies. And you talk about, the trouble to hire firefighters and EMTs. People aren't beating the doors down to be fire chiefs either. The thing is, yes, there's people that want to be fire chiefs because they want to be able to say that they got the 5 bugles, and and but it's not like the city of Rochester a couple of years ago did a nationwide search, and you would think that a place like Rochester would have 30 or 40 or 50 people that apply for the thing. And I think they had some quality candidates for it, but it's the business as a whole. Some of these guys are coming in, and look, I want to be on the fire truck. I want to go to the call. I don't want to sit in an office and shuffle paper around all day. So I think, personally, and I'm standing on my soapbox now, I think the state of New Hampshire and the fire chiefs and there's some pretty strong organizations that I belong to, and I'll say it, I think we hit our head in the sand and wouldn't admit there was a problem till all of a sudden, oh boy, there's a problem. And now we're all trying to play catch up. And the problem is you're not going to fix this problem overnight. I had the conversation with Connor earlier in the day that, I don't know when Barrington will get back to fully staffed. And it's not a fault of Barrington. It's not a fault. It's a product of the system. People aren't beating the doors down to get into this business. And, 30 years ago, you had 3 communities in the state, of 4 communities in Stratford County that had full-time people. There was Rochester, Dover, Somersworth, and Durham. And now everybody but Middleton and everybody in Stratford County but Middleton and New Durham have full-time staffing. So there's more jobs, and we're creating more jobs all the time, but the problem is we're not creating more firefighters. I have a kid in the recruit school in Concord right now. That program should have started 24 students. It started 20. Right now, with 4 weeks left in the program, there's 15 in the program.
So one of the biggest hurdles as we approach something like regionalization or a systematic change to how we provide a level of service like law enforcement or fire service, ambulance service, is people need to understand, people being the general public need to understand the challenges facing the service. And it's a difficult thing to do. I talk about the town being a customer service organization. We provide services to the residents, and the fire chief does an excellent job pivoting and adapting and evolving to make sure that we maintain a level of service which is expected by the residents. You call, you need a fire truck shows up. You call, you need an ambulance shows up. And so the end users, our goal is to make sure that the end users don't feel the pressure of the deficiencies in staffing, et cetera. But it will become systematically important that residents understand the challenges so that when we bring forward a crazy idea like regionalization in the future, which will probably cost more money and will probably result in a lower level of service, that people can understand that that is what's necessary to have a continued level of service that's sustainable. And all those details are yet to be determined, but the first step is certainly to make sure that people understand that a problem exists. So talking about it, spreading that message that, hey, look, Somebody's going to show up. If you have a medical emergency, somebody's going to show up. We're not at a situation where you're not going to get the care that you're looking for, but there's a lot of challenges.
Can you explain to me, why do you think regionalization costs more?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's speculation, right? Nobody knows, but I think that
More chiefs?
there are a lot of,
There's usually less chiefs, believe it or not.
yeah,
It-
so
yeah, it
there's a
depends
lot
on
of
the
different
model.
models. I think probably the bigger hurdle, even than a financial one, in a community like New Hampshire, and the chief touched on, is local control, right? So you would have to have a community that forfeits its ability to control the provision of fire service in their community to somebody else, right? We have very weak county government, but even those things that the county is responsible for, towns and cities in New Hampshire, across the state, grab onto and try to pull that control back from. And so, yeah, there'll be a lot of challenges to it. Point being, whether it's financial challenges or local control challenges, it will, or level of service challenges, right? Regionalization will probably increase response times because there's going to be specialized care, and you're going to be more decentralized. But
that's more a function of much more is expected now
yes,
than it was 20 years ago.
Excellent
of
point.
The firefighters and the people expect that you will have all this stuff and be able to do all these things. And that, to me, is a big change. And I know we've talked about it, same thing in law enforcement. Because I would love to see law enforcement centralized, because it makes no sense to me to have all these different dispatch centers and all these different police departments all over. And the model of a county level with district chiefs, I think is a good one. And to your point that, we don't want to impact the public, but the public needs to be made aware of it. Because if we keep supplying the same level of service, they're going to say, well, why should we make any changes? You're still doing a great job. That's wonderful. And that's where we hurt ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So talking about it helps.
Yeah.
No, and to kind of put that in perspective, I've been involved in Barrington Fire since 1978. And so I've had a front row seat to a lot of the changes. But, on Friday, we had 9 calls for service between noontime and midnight. And we went out for a significant traumatic injury for a guy that broke his ankle. While we were there, we got 2 more ambulance calls at the same time. So we ended up having to notify mutual aid. We got Stratford to come cover one of them, and we got Frisbee to come cover another. And a number of years ago, the volunteer service people, the chiefs and stuff, started putting this thing out. I never jumped on board with it because I'm not one of those kind of people that is going to stand there and tell you the sky's falling. And maybe that's a discredit to the business. But you had people that were saying, well, what if you call and nobody shows up? And that was a big buzzword for a while. Well, we're here now. We're there now. I don't have, during the day, I don't have anybody available. I have a couple of older guys that'll come in and drive the truck for us, but I don't have, what I have during the day is what I've got on staff for pay. At night and on the weekend, it's a little bit better because I do have 8 or 10 or a dozen people that still will come out and help volunteer when they can. But it's a real challenge. Brentwood's got a pretty good sized brush fire going on, and my fingers crossed that they weren't going to call us because we weren't going to be able to go help them. And that's a tough deal because, you never want to be that one to stand there and go, hey, they've called us for help and we can't come out and help them right now because we just don't have it. And, but you're right. There's been times when we've gone out and done things that probably we've skated by with 1 or 2 people and made it work, or we got there and realized the problem wasn't as big and canceled. But I had that conversation in my offices the other night. There has to be a plan, and they're working on it to say, hey, when you call for Barrington Fire to show up and nobody shows up, the dispatcher needs to know what to do next. They need to be able, it's not up to them to decide who's gonna come to my house. Barrington has to have a plan in place so that if it's Rick Walker's house and nobody shows up to go, we gotta call this community to ask them to come help.
And Frida has some.
Are you going to present this in?
Yeah, I think the how we package that up, right, and this falls with a lot of shared responsibility. But we've continued to talk about with the select board, talk about it here, and bring that conversation to the community will be important, definitely.
Also, another model is like, I mean, the administration is central, but everything else is local. Model that could work. Addition is administration is central. That way,
Definitely.
because this is such an important area of service. Because if somebody is having a heart attack, you're not going to have somebody coming from 40 minutes.
Yeah, and there's so many layers, and we should stay on topic for as it relates to the budget. I mean, these big picture, long-term policy topics are important for everybody to pay attention to. But the important message is that those conversations are ongoing, right? Figuring out who we can talk to, what players in the region are willing to have those conversations, have similar needs. Those are happening, will continue to happen. And I expect Barrington, if there are innovative ideas that are evolving in our region, I expect that Barrington will be part of those. Not waiting on the sidelines to see if things work. So
let me ask you a question. I understand the idea of offering $5 more bonus to part-time people. Did you also consider offering a part-time bonus to full-time people to distinguish us even further from Milton? And hopefully, it's a zero-sum game. So how do we win at that game?
Well, I think that's a very good point. And the one full-timer I have left, I had that conversation with him. And I guess I kind of get it from the perspective that he's sitting there going, so you're going to pay Peter Royce $30 an hour to do the same thing you're paying me $24 an hour for. And I explained to him, I'm like, but it's costing us somewhere between $52 and $57 an hour to have you. I don't know what you get for an insurance plan. And I don't have a right to know that. So I just have to base it on the fact that it either costs the town of Barrington $52 an hour to have you or $57. So he gets the fact that it kind of makes sense to hire Peter at 29 or 30 because he's still, from a benefit standpoint, he's still better off because Peter's not getting retired, he's not getting insurance, he's not getting holiday pay, he's not getting vacations and that stuff. So
This is a firefighter. It's really difficult to hire somebody full-time if you're not giving them any benefits.
Well, he's saying they're getting it from Rochester, which I understand. But I would have thought that doesn't really help cohesiveness and morale. And I'm just wondering if there's a way, if it would be better to do everything we can to attract full-time people, just so that we can maintain that. And, maybe it does require paying those who are already here more, but maybe that's worthwhile in the long run.
And the select board, this isn't a short-term solution, but the select board has already indicated their interest in doing a total rewards review in the beginning of next year. So this group had talked about, the value of our benefits compared to other communities from a total compensation perspective, not just our wages, but all wage categories and the cost of our benefits. And we did that in 2019, and it was really informative. It allowed us to adjust our wages and benefits collectively to find a better balance. And so the select board's interest in doing that again in early 2025, I think will help advise how we make the proposed benefit adjustments and wage adjustments for 2026. If, whether or not something is necessary in the fire department before that in order to attract full-time employees, that remains to be seen. But I think that the select board, this select board, has been open to midstream adjustments to impact recruitment and retention previously. And so if it comes to that, I think the select board would be responsive to considering it.
Yeah, I guess then you'd take it out of the unassigned fund balance if we went over.
Can't take it out of unassigned fund balance. That would come from like the incident fund. The only way you can spend down unassigned fund balance is with an emergency situation with permission from the Department of Revenue Administration. But we generally operate with about a 3% budget surplus. And I qualify that to say that we can't spend 1 penny more than what residents appropriate. So our only option is to have a surplus. And, you know, we do an excellent job, I believe, our department heads spending within the budget and not spending when it isn't necessary. But one of the tools that gives the select board is if something comes up during the year and there is surplus available, they can redirect those funds to those unanticipated priorities.
I guess I understand what you're saying, but I also feel like you've tried to slim down the budget a little bit. You've increased or decreased the incident fund. So I just wonder if there's a convergence of problems. I actually wonder if it would be, if residents would be happier if instead of hiring some of these other positions, we work to hire our full-time fire and police, and whether that would be a better thing for residents to swallow.
Yep. Yeah, and that's certainly, you know, the role of this group is to make recommendations like that to the select board. Hey, listen, take the same bottom line budget, but take money away from here and channel that towards this area, which we think is a higher priority for the residents in the what's facing the community right now. So,
Isn't our surplus usually closer to 6 or more percent?
Yes, residents.
Yes.
I'll get you a look back. Are you,
600,000 out of 10,000 out of 10 million would be.
what you're forgetting
You're
is
talking about,
that's contribution to unassigned fund balance, which comes from two places: unexpended appropriations and revenue in excess of projections.
Yep.
We much more frequently have more revenue in excess of projections than we have. And part of the problem of that is we have to give our final revenue projection by September 1st. And there's a lot of the year that happens between September 1st and December 31st. And so that, and again, this is one of those things, if you underestimate your revenue, now all of a sudden you're raising a lot more in taxes than you anticipated and all of your projections are wrong. So yes, I am admittedly conservative in estimating revenue, which results in revenue in excess of projections. But I will say confidently that I never want to overestimate our revenue and deal with the political fallout of that.
Is there a chance we've overestimated? I mean, the state is beginning to hurt, I guess. It doesn't seem like they're hurting in the same ways we might, or that, you know, would roll down to us. But how do you see that happening?
Yeah, it absolutely could. So the revenue estimate in the accompanying the 2025 budget proposal is less than the revenue projection for, or the actual estimate, not the projection. We will collect more than the projection, but the revenue estimate for 2024. So I am budgeting for a reduction in revenue based on a few factors. One is a reduction in interest on investments. That's something that we'll continue to see scale back based on economic projections. But also the how state revenue pressures could impact the town of Barrington is specifically with rooms and meals tax. So not to provide more information that's necessary, but in the briefest way possible, the state law for rooms and meals tax is a proportional cost share of rooms and meals tax collected. For a decade, the legislature suspended the rules, basically ignoring that law that said how rooms and meals tax was supposed to be, and they just budgeted a certain amount, which was less than the required proportional share, and that's what went to municipalities. In the last 4 years, through Governor Sununu's advocacy, that distribution was returned to the legal requirement. And so even just this year, because it's a proportional share and because rooms and meals tax collections have increased, the town received $40,000 more this year than we did last year in rooms and meals tax. So from $888,000 to $928,000. And so if the legislators are looking at the revenue pressure that they're seeing across the state, they're going to look at that pot of money, a rooms and meals tax, and they're going to say, let's go back to suspending the rules. We'll level fund it at 928,000 for the town of Barrington, say, and anything in addition, we will collect and redistribute. And so, yeah, some of that, like the number I carried was 888,000 for a revenue projection for 2025. So some of that conservative revenue estimation is built into that. But yeah, it is a revenue reduction, though. We're projecting a reduction in revenue. Closing the loop with the fire chief, the last item for conversation was a reduction in the fire truck replacement capital reserve. So the current proposal from the fire chief was 100,000. This group, in evaluating opportunities to get that down to the 600,000, proposed bringing that contribution to 20,000. And so maybe we'll get comments from the chief or counter proposal from the chief, and then continue the conversation. And unless there's more for the chief, then we can move into the finalization phase.
No, so I spoke with Administrator McIver today, and the $100,000 number is based on recommendations of the budget committee and not having put enough money away for the model that I had proposed, and by a little bit of Yankee ingenuity, instead of replacing the tank truck a couple of years ago, we did a refurb and saved the town probably about 60% of the cost of a new truck by putting a new cabin chassis under that. And then it was time to replace the forestry truck. And you can, if you call a company that does these trucks that say, hey, this is what I want for a truck, and when you deliver it, I just want to put water in it and start using it, you're going to spend $250,000 to $300,000 for that truck. We looked at it and basically replaced in kind what we already had purchased. We bought a cabinet chassis, we put a what I call a running body or a utility body on it. We're going to have a slide-in unit, which the selectmen approved a year ago. That truck's going to end up costing the taxpayers. It's sitting down in Massachusetts waiting for the body to get put on, and I'm hopeful that we'll take delivery. I was hoping we'd take delivery before now. That truck is going to be all outfitted, a little over $100,000. We're looking at in 2026, it would be time to replace our oldest Class A pumper. That truck in today's dollars, 2024 dollars, is about $750,000. We're actually in the process now of looking at doing a refurb. I think the refurb of that truck is, I don't have the numbers with me, but somewhere in the neighborhood of around $150,000. So the bigger issue the town's going to be faced with is our engine 2, which is our newest engine. It's the 2007 Smeal. That's going to need some work in the next 3 to 5 years if we're going to keep the thing. One of the guys that does some work for us on it is saying, hey, look, it's not going to fall apart on you tomorrow, but you're not going to get 7 or 8 more years out of it. So he basically has indicated to us that it probably makes sense for us to refurb engine 1, spend about $150,000, give or take, and then I'm shooting from the hip, but I'm going to say somewhere in around 2028 or 29, look at replacing engine 2. It takes about 24 to 28 months right now to get a vehicle. I'm absolutely certain that it's hard for a community the size of Barrington to take $1 million and buy a fire truck. It's it's not saying you don't need the truck and you shouldn't spend that $1 million. It's the idea that we're standing there, somebody's gonna stand there and look at people and say, we need to replace that fire truck and it's $1 million, and people are going, that's a lot of money. It's absolutely a lot of money, especially for something, I like to use a term that you hope we never use, because when we're using it, somebody's not having a good day. But I think in the next, I think communities are probably already doing it. I see Barrington in the next 4 or 5 years starting to look at bonding these things. At the end of the day, yes, you pay, you know, obviously if you put all the money away in the capital reserve like we've been doing for the last number of years, it's beneficial to the taxpayers because we're not paying interest and we're not. But I fully expect that the model of asking the taxpayers to put $150 or $200 or $250,000 away to keep up with the rising cost of fire trucks is going to be pretty tough. And at some point, the taxpayers are going to sit there and they're going to vote no. And, you know, I think we're going to be looking at the idea of having to bond these things, you know, and obviously there's a cost. Peter knows, you understand with the bonds, there's a cost associated with these things. But, you know, I had a pretty long conversation with Administrator McIver today. I obviously wasn't real thrilled with the idea of going from $100,000 down to 20, but he was able to articulate, at least from his perspective, where you guys were coming from. And I guess in the grand scheme of things, it makes sense. To me, the $20,000 is a placeholder so that, you know, a couple of years ago, the town came out and told the voters, you know, the sky's falling, the world's coming to an end, and don't support any of these warrant articles. It was all over Channel 9. It was all over the news. And every single warrant article that year failed. And thankfully, the fire department came back the next year and was able to get the money to put back into for a fire truck. But some of the things that aren't as cushy and comfortable that we should have been putting money away from, it took 3 or 4 years to finally get people to support that. So I was frustrated that, you know, I still to this day don't believe that the town should have done that. I think they should have let the voters decide for themselves how they wanted to spend their money. But at any rate, they failed. So I think by certainly leaving the $20,000 in as a placeholder, the fire department's not going to be forced down the road to start rebuilding something that's already there. So
Again, I would say fire and police are the most important things we can do to support. So I don't necessarily want to just reduce them just to reduce them.
Yep.
And so if you feel like that's unwise, I'm willing to live with that and support it. I guess to me, I understand what you're saying about bonding, you know, but we've probably by holding on to that, we had 717,000 in there now, given the interest rates that we've received and the increase in inflation, you know, we probably lost a little bit there too. So right. I don't know which is the best way, but I don't know if you all have a feeling either way. I guess the question is, what I'm hearing from you is that we're running a risk. If we look at this, the warrant article maybe is immediate needs next 5-7 years. You're saying that we might not have enough money, even if we put in the same amount every year.
Yeah, I think it's reasonable this year to do the 20,000, and you know, as Connor had indicated, one of the questions I had is that if it takes 2 years to get that fire truck, if you go to the selectmen and say, hey, it's time to order a fire truck, and we put a bid spec out, and here's the cost of it, and the problem is in the savings account we have this much money, but the cost is this much money. Now the selectmen have really a couple of options. They have to either look in other areas and see if they can make up that difference either through the revolving fund or whatever, or they're forced to say, we're going to put a warrant article in and ask the voters to raise X number of dollars to complete the purchase of this vehicle. Well, the problem is is that you can't purchase that vehicle until you're sure that you have whatever that bid price is. And then for years, what we did in this town, when we bought a fire truck back in the days when, early days when Pete first got on the board, we would go to town meeting in March and say, we need X number of dollars for a fire truck. And if the voters approved it, then the next day or two later, they'd order that fire truck or a highway truck or whatever it is. And so, it's nice to be able to stand there and go, hey, we got $600,000 in the savings account, but the truck's $800,000. Well, you can't order that truck until the selectmen have come up with a plan to determine where that other 200,000 is. And so, to me, that's where the idea is maybe, when we could buy that truck that we're looking at, our 2001 Smeel, it cost the taxpayers $197,000. I'm not sure what that is in today's dollars. It was a lot of money then, but for $197,000, you could get away with putting $40,000 or $50,000 away in the savings account to buy that truck. But now, when I sit here and look at it and say it's $1 million,
Bill's got something?
Does that raise the issue or the question of, is it wise to have these individual capital reserve funds rather than saying, let's have a capital reserve fund and all the money's in there? The voters still get the opportunity to say, shall the town withdraw X amount of dollars for a fire truck, for a highway truck? Pardon me?
That's an interesting thought.
And that way, we're not, we're short $20,000 here. What are we going to do? We have the money. It's in a capital reserve fund, and that fund can be used to buy capital items.
So the devil's advocate to that is a couple of years ago that conversation floated around department heads, and I'm not sure how far into the select board it got, but there were a couple people like myself that stood there and said, I don't think this is a good idea, and here's why. I'll tell you why. Rick Walker can walk out there tomorrow. I'm not being arrogant, but Rick Walker can walk out there tomorrow and say to the taxpayers, I need you to give me $200,000 toward the next fire truck. And I'm almost positive that the voters would support it, not because of Rick Walker, but because it's a fire truck, and if we need a fire truck, we better get a fire truck. They made them same block of voters may decide that, well, I don't know if I want to buy a police cruiser, or I don't know if I want to buy a dump truck, or I don't know if I want to buy a trash compactor, because you see what I'm saying? When you looked at, and so I sit here and go, if you look back all the years, the fire department has rarely ever been told no for anything they wanted, but you couldn't say that about some of the other departments. So if you're and I think it's a little bit of a struggle, and I'll just ask each of you independently. Let's just say we got $650,000 in warrant articles or whatever it is. How are you going to go in there when you pull the curtain close? Are you going to just automatically check yes when there's a request for you to take $650,000 or $1 million of your tax money and say, we want to put this in a capital reserve for future expenses? I dare say that you got a pretty good chance it won't pass.
I hear you, but I still think the idea then of just having the voters still get the decide. They can decide if they're going to take $200,000 for this or that. They have that option, but the money sits there. The money is there. It's available to the town, and it's up to the voters then to decide what they're going to spend it on.
Yeah, so systematically, it's a good idea, and that's why the cities do it, right? But the benefit the cities have is their legislative body meets once or twice a month, right? So the city councilors have the ability to make decisions on appropriations like that on an ongoing basis. We get one bite at the apple per year. And an organization, especially the size of Barrington now, but even smaller organizations, need to be more nimble than that. And that's why the capital reserve mechanism of having non-lapsing funds is set up where residents, the one time a year that they get to, can appropriate those funds and make it available, but for a specific purpose, and then designate the select board, or in some cases other boards, as the agents to expend. So throughout the years, but there's a check on that, right? You have the trustees of the trust funds who evaluate the requested appropriation, the requested expenditure against the purpose of that account to make sure it's spent for that purpose. The cities, they will bond, the city of Nashua, the city council will just establish a $20 million bond for undisclosed purposes. And they will draw down from that bond, that bonding authority. Once they have that bond established, they'll draw down from it for priorities. Because like Rick was talking about, when you need to bond things, there's a lot of overhead. So that is a good way to do it with that form of government. With our form of government, it's more difficult. But I think the compromise bill for what you're talking about is really unassigned fund balance. So you'll have to remember that the history in Barrington was that the longest history, the longest string of doing things one way, I guess I should say. But for about a 9 or 10 year period of time in Barrington, all of the separate financial warrant articles were funded from unassigned fund balance. And that's the money, like that's taxpayer dollars, right? That's money that residents have set aside, theoretically, in a collective account. And then at town meeting each year, we asked them to release or appropriate $100,000, couple $100,000 for a specific purpose where they got to decide, but it didn't have a direct tax rate impact. So that is what we used to do. The problem with this group and the select board had concern with continuing to do it that way for 2 reasons. One, because it was a false choice. It was presented as a false choice to residents because you're saying, hey, give us this $100,000, but it's not going to change your tax rate either way. And 2, we stopped having as much surplus unassigned fund balance to cover all of the additional financial warrant articles. And so, yeah, I can't disagree with you that it's a good idea, but with our form of government, I don't think it would allow us to be nimble enough to address the priorities that we have throughout the year. Otherwise, we'd be setting up special meetings. Hey, everybody come back in to vote because we need this money for this purpose.
Let me ask you one other question. It relates to hiring. I mean, sometimes the way a town funds its fire department probably has an impact on how people look at our fire department, whether they want to work for us. Would that be accurate?
For instance,
So I guess the question, natural extension is, is our way of managing our fire trucks make us look like we don't invest in our fire and we get older and older trucks compared to surrounding towns? And it just sort of shows us being aged and dated and.
No, I don't think so. And the reason I say that is because when you call for the fire department to come to your house or the ambulance to come to your house, it's technically it's your worst day, or it's one of the worst days you ever had in your life. Even if it's, we may look at it and go, it's not that big a deal, but to you, it's a big deal. Whether it's police, fire, or ambulance, you need help. You ask for help. I don't think anybody. Certainly if I pulled up with a fire truck and the fenders are falling off and the tires.
I think Scott's talking about employees.
Yeah.
I'm
talking about
and so
employees.
to that point.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Fortunately, these decisions aren't made in a vacuum. So the fire department has a slate of officers, and typically the process for replacing or refurbishing comes from the floor of the fire department, right? The officers present a recommendation to the fire chief that he brings to me, comes to the select board. And so the involvement at that level, I think, is important for that exact reason. We want to make sure that the equipment that we're providing to the people that we want to do this job are the equipment that they need or want for, morale or whatever other ancillary benefits.
But to that end, if I may, I think from all public service employees, police, fire, your facilities matter. I mean, if you're hiring people and you want them to come work for you, if you have a brand new station, everything's new, geez, I really want to work here. But if you don't, they're like, I don't think so. So, yeah.
We have room for improvement there. We have a lot of room for improvement there.
Although the populace rejected that.
No, that's what I mean. I mean, we didn't, that tells me when everything passes except that article, that tells me that we did not adequately demonstrate the need to the community about that. And if we can draw the line connecting recruitment and retention and the safety and security and the level of service we're able to provide, if we're able to connect all those dots for residents, I'm sure we can get their support, but we failed, you know? Anything else for Rick?
That,
Thanks, Chief.
In the cemetery, you had a question?
Yeah,
on-
we answered that last time.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
I was gonna say,
We
just-
recorded some of the questions in there, but he was asking if we could do it collectively, and so I gave them a history of how we considered that and why the trustees.
And I actually spoke to the road agent yesterday, and he acknowledged what I already knew, but I didn't I wanted to be prepared in the fact that, because we're not in a position to build it right now, it would require additional staff and stuff, so, the trustees for the cemetery met today, and, we tentatively agreed to a, 2-year contract with the, current vendor, because there's obviously a financial benefit by us signing a 2-year contract as opposed to a single-year contract. It's about $4,000 difference. They're well aware of the fact that, yes, we can sign a 2-year contract, but if there's there has to be a non-funding clause in there. So.
What's that single year cost?
Top of my head, 14,000 and some change.
Okay, give me that number. We'll update the budget because we did a placeholder for 15,680.
Yeah,
For-
I'll give you them numbers
Okay.
tomorrow.
Great. Budget's going to go down a whole $800. Get ready. We just bounced the budget, ladies and gentlemen.
So is this like 20,000?
Yes, that's what I heard.
Well, I don't know.
The decision was not made, right?
No.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's still what's on the floor, though, I think.
Yeah.
I think we got the comments we were looking for from the fire chief.
Yeah.
We have feedback from other department heads to review as well before we finalize.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Rick.
you very much.
So we're in kind of uncharted territory of how we want to approach finalization. I think whatever we can accomplish today is great, but I think we ought to develop a very specific plan for our next meeting. And I suspect there's information that you're going to want Amy and I to pull together for that conversation. And so it will be important to prioritize that with our time here today. I don't know what your preference is, Peter, to talk about how we do the next meeting or start by getting through what we can at this meeting.
my preference would be to simply discuss how we're going to go about our next meeting.
Great.
But
So we'll
that's
start
up to
there.
the committee, really.
You're the chair. Unilateral. Boom. Yeah. Sorry, Mom.
May I
Not
ask,
me.
have we gotten any responses on the outstanding questions?
Yeah, excellent question. So Amy, if she hasn't yet, we talked about that this afternoon. We are telling the department heads with outstanding questions that date certain we need that information to get to the budget committee. We did receive just today an updated budget from the library. The numbers changed again. And so I think we're going to have to work with the trustees in the future to get the numbers to a more firm spot earlier in the process. Fortunately, last time the budget request went up over $20,000. This time the total budget request went down about $11,000. And so we need to sift through that. We just got it today.
When would we get that information?
We determined that we would send that out with the minutes, if that's
Okay.
acceptable.
Sure.
So we'll
okay?
kind of co-prioritize those to get that information.
Because I personally would like to see, and Mona's right, I'd like to see all of these questions answered before I could even start to think about where something might be reduced or increased.
Yeah, so respectfully though, so the library I think is one of the big ones where there were unanswered questions about and I don't know that we got the answers to the capital reserve, but I understand the importance of that. Some of the other outstanding questions like the revenue structure in the land use department, that's really important, but I don't see that information as advising a change to the budget as much as it would advise a change to the revenues and the fee structure that we collect. So I guess what pieces of outstanding information are important for you to be able to consider the budget as a whole, so we make sure that we get you the information you want. And you can add to that list.
I think the staffing We asked the department heads to provide what services when could be completed. You know, if we didn't hire the additional hours at the transfer station, assistant planner, things like that.
The impact, yeah, the
The
impact of
impact.
not having those positions.
I
Yep,
think that's critical.
yep, I agree.
I mean, I think I'm setting on this thing of not decreasing fire warrant article, but maybe, so I'm just worried that we would underfund it this year, overfund it next year. It might be more useful just to keep it steady. But I'm really wondering if we need to focus our budget on the fire and police this year at the expense of other.
Yeah.
But a lot of these positions, if I understand correctly, have already been approved by the select board.
Yeah.
That
So,
doesn't mean this group can't recommend a change to that policy decision.
but are people already hired?
No,
No,
no, no, no.
no. There probably won't be hired, I think.
Well, it's subject to approval by town meeting anyways. Like the police officer is scheduled at a July 1st hire. The conservation planner, same thing. The assistant planner for conservation,
summer.
July 1st.
I think like the Conservation Commission position could be funded fully out of the conservation funds, right? I mean, I know it's supposed to be a revenue share over time. Well, let's just make it,
Yeah, but
Yeah, they
eventually it
pay-
ends up with the town.
yeah, but, let
It's
them,
like,
I don't know.
but I agree with you, Scott. I think keeping the fire truck warrant article up, I'd be more in favor of that than I am of more part-time people or full-time people, or they'll certainly become full-time before long. And I think that's where, if you look at especially what it costs us in benefits, that's where the budget really soars, is with more people.
But I think the town would understand if it was fire and police.
But
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
some
I think so
positions
too.
are more important. And then those
mean, it's-
positions
sorry.
are so important that they are the services that everybody needs. And also hiring a part-time firefighter is like, nobody's going to be interested in that unless you're doing from somebody else that's already,
Mhm.
and that's not a good idea. Gotta have like a full-time person that actually does the work.
Yeah, that's
Because
the
if you're
goal.
not giving people benefits, why they should work? Like,
Yeah, I mean, the folks that we have filling part-time positions are vast majority of them are full-time firefighters in other
Yeah, that's what I'm
communities.
saying.
And so they benefit from the scheduling, right? So most of the more progressive fire departments across the region have 24-hour schedules, right? So there's a lot of room in your week to do other work, and firefighters systematically do a lot of other work, right? And so some of them choose to do other work in fire departments, and so filling shifts with part-time staff in that way. That isn't the preferred model, but if we didn't exercise that model right now, we wouldn't have much for coverage. The other, and this didn't really come up strongly, and then I know you have something, Dan, but the other systematic change in the fire service is the call force, right? So think of these as like per diem staff, right? Like, but you have a structure fire, and it used to be that you had a team of people that had pagers, were certified firefighters. They'd leave their day job and go and help put out that fire or help respond if you had multiple incidents. And so that is going away. And so to maintain the same level of service that we had before with that call force, we need more full-time employees. And so some agencies, Farmington's a good example, they brought forward a proposal to taxpayers a few years ago to add 6 full-time employees in 1 year, one separate warrant article. But that was their solution. That was their way to solve the problem of maintaining the same level of service, which, Bill, I appreciate the way that you pointed it out. It isn't the same level of service. It's over a longer period of time. It's an increasing level of service, but maintaining that more recent, same level of service, but that requires more full-time staff members. So yeah, it is a systematic problem that there isn't any one solution to. It's a wicked problem in that way.
I happen to like the idea of getting the full-time certified firefighters from other agencies that will come work for us. I think it saves us huge amounts of money because we get a full-time certified person, and the chief can obviously vet him or her when they come on, so we get that, but we don't have the additional benefits that we have to pay for that individual. We're paying them a straight salary, X amount of dollars. So I think that helps us in the short run. Long run, yeah, it would be better to have our own people on our own department, but in the interim, I think it's a good deal.
And I know Dannon had something.
No, I was just gonna say that in many ways, we're talking about regionalization here, because most of these part-timers are in the area. They're in Rochester, they're in Dover. So this may be what the future looks like as far as our service is concerned. Because I would disagree about truck. We can work around trucks, but it's real hard to work around people. I think the people here may be much more important to our protection, as fire protection, police protection as well, than to worry so much about machinery that machines don't work unless their people work them.
So what is the natural conclusion of that? Are you saying don't fund the warrant article and put more money in the budget, operating budget?
You know, that would be, I would think that's the first place we look, is to make sure we have the people, to do the job.
Yeah.
And then
What we don't have, though,
we need both.
yeah,
We need both. I'm just saying that if you have to balance people against machinery, I'd balance it with the people.
what we don't have is a proposal from the fire chief asking for additional funds for wage or wage categories. So I shared with this group in the initial budget presentation that the initial budget increase in the fire department was $130,000 more than what you see here. And we eliminated a fraction of that. What we did with most of it was shift the burden of those costs to the revolving fund. So the additional $40,000 it cost to pay those part-time employees an extra $5 an hour was included in the initial budget proposal. That was moved to the revolving fund. Additional overtime funds when we have full-time employees to backfill shifts and do that. That's a big part of retaining full-time employees, is the availability of overtime. They're working, they're not working a lot of days in the week. They're working a lot of hours. They're not working a lot of days. And so when you have somebody who wants to work as much as they can, right? If they were out swinging a hammer, they'd be working 80 hours a week and making money like it. So having the availability of overtime, but you moving those wage increases, those proposed wage increases into the revolving fund addresses the priorities the fire chief has in staffing and making funds available for all of these components of the people in the department, which we agree are the most important. So there isn't really anything we said no, we being Amy and I, said no to him on what he asked for additional. We just shifted some of the burden to the revolving fund because the revolving fund can handle it, right? We just started moving 100% of revenue into the revolving fund. And so that account has the cash flow to support some of the ancillary wage areas. So apart from this group, making a recommendation to the select board, that the select board consider a midstream wage increase, of 10% to the full-time firefighter wage pay plan, the whatever. Apart from a recommendation like that, I don't think that there is anything in the here and now that we have heard from Rick or that we have discussed as far as ideas that we aren't already doing at some level, or more money would allow us to do more of.
But yet he's unable to hire somebody.
Yeah. So, and that's what I mean. Like if the recommendation of this group is we support, this is a priority for the community and we support the select board, don't wait until March. Take surplus that you have available in the budget and increase the minimum and maximum for the firefighters, full-time firefighters by 10%. That's a policy recommendation this group could make to the select board and say that, we'd like to see that increase, sustainable funding at that level, those wage rates in the 2025 budget. And Amy and I could crunch numbers on that.
If we were to give them a bonus rather than a salary bump, does that affect benefits?
No, nope. But we already have an up to a $10,000 sign-on bonus for certified firefighters.
What about doing some of the more years of service, or if you're here for a year, at least.
Yeah,
you get-
adjusting benefits.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I
something.
mean, that $10,000 is generally structured over 3 years, so you don't get it all at once. And yeah, so I mean, we have that. And you know, to your point, it obviously isn't working.
Yeah.
Uh,
I guess when I looked at this, I did this, I love AI.
I've gathered,
slice-
yes.
I can slice and dice everything. But I looked at the budget, and it was actually, if you look at the warrant articles and you look at the operating budget, 87%, I think it was spent between the fire, the highway, and the police.
Mhm.
They're the top three. Actually, the town municipal part of it is above fire, but if you consider some of that's actually needed to generate the income that the state requires us to do, and it's not there. But, you know, if you start to look at it this way, our government really doesn't have a lot of leeway to spend elsewhere. And I think that there's this view from the town that, oh, we just spend frivolously. But when you look at this and you ask, where are we paying our core services? I don't know. I mean, it's something we do need to start to communicate to the public and really help them understand.
I like that idea of pulling out the core services. So Scott sent me, and I haven't replied to him yet, but he sent me he submitted the initial budget presentation and asked for feedback on how to improve that. And one of the pieces of feedback was draw a clearer line between the impact to services for the money. But to that end, taking and demonstrating this is the core services, right? If you're looking at the roads you drive on, your need for law enforcement, your need for other public safety, police or fire and ambulance. If this is 87%, and you know I don't know that, I'm just repeating your number. I trust it. But if this is 87% of the total operating budget, then that's an important thing to get out in front of. So yeah, I like that idea of talking about core services, cost of core services.
But I think there's also this idea of storytelling as well. And I think we need to get better at telling that story, particularly around fire and police, and help people really understand what's going on here and the challenges. So I don't know that I don't think the public has that understanding at all.
I'm new, so it's like, you know, I came here and now I see all this budget and everything, and like coming out of California, I said, this is how we really budget?
Right.
To me, it's like, yeah.
It is an unusual way to go, but I mean, it is, I don't know, it is interesting.
It's very interesting.
So
To me,
let's-
It's like, you know, it's very eye-opening, and also, I mean, I'm all for support of it, right?
Yeah.
So understanding as a
Yeah.
resident.
This is always really incredible. What service we provide, cheap it is. People complain about their tax rate here a lot, and they always will, but we provide the amazing services. And in reality, we have, especially the core services, we should be able to convince people this is important because they aren't that high. Now, if we're going to go out and build an amusement park or something, then maybe has a very good point. I think the point is that we need to make sure that they know that.
Yeah, what I'd recommend, certainly, we've talked oftentimes that communication is a lack in how we present things, and I agree with that. But let's focus on next week. Because what I'm proposing is that we each take our task to look at every single budget, and we either accept it or we make recommendations to add or subtract item by item. And so I think that'll be a pretty lengthy meeting if we do that. But if we come prepared and try to, stay away from the tangential discussion, I think we can get it done in a reasonable time
So you're
frame.
saying go through each department by
Right.
department,
Right.
okay? And then we get that, and then we go look at the warrant articles?
Yes.
So and I will aggregate the feedback. Obviously, we were able to catch some of the department heads. This is relative to capital reserve contributions. We were able to catch some of the department heads before they made their presentations. But for those that had already made their presentations that we talked to about capital reserve contributions, aggregating that feedback so you kind of see it all in total. Mark, the road agent, had some second thoughts after the meeting about some of the short-sightedness of reducing it to the level that we were talking about reducing. And so, we need to pull those comments into, something to get to you all. And the other piece of the warrant articles specifically is we targeted 600,000, which was a really aggressive target, which takes the minimum amount that's already built into the tax rate. What we didn't factor in, although we discussed, was that we would also have additional surplus unassigned fund balance above 12.5% that could be used as well, like we have used traditionally, spending down to that 12.5%. So that will move the $600,000 number up some. And I want to talk just briefly, because this will advise our conversation next week, about how that looks. So unassigned fund balance is recommended at anywhere from 5 to 8% up to 17%. So when the recommendation was 8 to 17%, we targeted the midpoint of the range. We have a policy that says 12.5% is our number. We want to maintain 12.5%. We have a whole chapter that shows how we have done that historically, and we've done that well. If you actually, for those of you that have your budget binders, if you go to chapter 6, and if you look at the page that has the green and the red and the yellow, targeted fund balance history. So when we're talking about 12.5%, we're talking about 12.5% of what they call regular general fund operating expenditures. And that number is over $30 million. That number is the entire school appropriation, town appropriation, and county appropriation, everything that we collect taxes for. And so that number artificially inflates when we appropriate more money for things like a library or $1 million community center. Okay, so in 2024, the regular general fund operating expenditures was $36,693,000, right? And before that, it was $35 million. For 2025, and I built some of this in, but I didn't build enough. Our general fund operating expenses is $38,800,000. So that's a temporary that's a temporary increase, right? We appropriated $3 million for a library and $1 million for a community center, that we won't have those same appropriations in 2025. Nobody's talking about that. So it will go back down. But because it's up that high, what the Department of Revenue Administration says is that we are currently holding 12.78% of our regular general fund operating expenditures in unassigned fund balance, or $4,957,391. So that, I'll update this table, but that gives us some money, a couple $100,000, to reach 12.5%, or more flexibility if we look and say we know this $38,800,000 number is artificially high because of the library and the community center. So how we look at those numbers and how much in addition to the 600,000 we want to look at using for warrant articles will matter. So we'll get some updated information to you about that as well. What else do you all need or want? There have been minimal changes to the operating budget through the process. I told you about the benefit cost change. That was a net reduction of about 17,000. That and across all departments. I don't think you need a new printout of every budget line because that's there wasn't any big number anywhere. I'll double check our census changes. I don't really remember any that were super impactful. A lot of times we'll have vacancies, we'll hire somebody, and then we'll be able to budget for their health election. So I'll go through and see if there's any big changes that way, so that you have a good operating budget number to work from for each department. We'll get the unanswered questions that impact the operating budget, information, feedback from department heads on the warrant articles and the updated fund balance numbers. But what else do you need before the week's out to be prepared for Tuesday?
Nothing from me.
Again,
The default budget.
All right.
I'll get you the default budget.
Yeah, I guess to me, the my view is that there's not a lot of meat to cut from the operating budgets. There's here or there. To me, I'm looking at this more at a higher level and thinking about next year. You know, how do we present this to our community so that they believe that their money's being spent well, setting us up for maybe a more productive conversation next year with the bond. I don't know.
A good presentation.
It's more than that. I think it's a continual. I
It's,
mean,
it's
Yeah,
messaging,
it
it's
should be
messaging.
continual, of
Yeah.
course, yeah.
and
And-
it's not just over the tax year. We got to do it all year.
Yeah, and the big challenge, right? And this is why anybody, I will ask for feedback from anybody ever. We rarely have a captive audience to provide a complete message to, right? So the most comprehensive presentation that is given is either at the budget hearing, which none of the public participates in, and few numbers watch it online, and the other is the deliberative session. We'll have 150 people in the room at deliberative session. We have over 7,000 registered voters. So we're not talking about large groups of people to have FaceTime with to have those conversations. So the messages that we're able to get out to people in the community are in much smaller formats than even a presentation, right? And so bundling that information up into the most essential parts and getting it out in bite-sized tidbits is the biggest challenge. And getting it out consistently and meeting residents where they are is the other big challenge.
Maybe time-wise between the budget presentation and the actual voting? Does that seem appropriate?
Yeah, that's where we focus all the efforts, right? And so what we've done in the past is we have focused on pointing everybody back to where all the information is, like on the electronic budget binder or the warrant webpage. And so, we put up the signs, we send we send the postcards in the mail, we put things out. We've done, for the last 2 years on social media, we've done What's That Warrant Article? So every day leading up to the voting, we feature one warrant article, all the details of just that one warrant article, so it's a bite-sized tidbit. All of those things work, right? Everything reaches somebody, but there's only so much time that we have to invest in things like that. And so prioritizing the ones that are most effective is essential. We have to do that, And the bigger that team is, and that's why I've really empowered the select board. This group did a great job at the presidential primary at the beginning of this year. You remember we had a table, we engaged with residents. All of that is effective tools to spread the message. We'll take all the help we can get, all the ideas that you have, for sure.
I do think having the individual warrant articles was a very good idea.
Awesome. That's good feedback. And that's a pretty easy thing. We set that up. We just pull the information, the content from the voter guide. Tiffany and I schedule that a month and a half in advance, and it's just on autopilot. It just goes, right? And it's scheduled, the posts go up every day, and, anybody that has comments or questions, we engage with. But yeah, so that's a pretty low effort, seemingly high reward. Okay,
Anything else?
we're ready for 3:30 next week.
I'd move we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.